Hi guys, so we are here at AnalogShift with Tania Edwards from Collectability, and we're gonna see the coolest collection of Patek Philippe's. Thank you for showing.
Oh, you're very welcome. I'm so pleased you're here to see these electronic timepieces because they're very unusual.
Can you tell us a few words what this collection is? And
Sure.
These are very unusual and very cool.
Certainly, with pleasure. So we're here today in the offices of AnalogShift, our partners in this collection of the world's largest grouping of Patek Philippe Electronic timepieces. So it's very exciting you've come to see it because you're going to learn a lot about the history of timekeeping, particularly quartz technology. And that's often an area that I know you're focused on, but in the history of timekeeping, it's often a misunderstood area. And we are very fortunate today to learn a lot about how it came about, when it came about, and interestingly, Patek Philippe's involvement in that. And which is very unexpected for most people because Patek Philippe is obviously known as a maker of the world's finest mechanical timepieces.
Yes, absolutely.
But it started in 1948 with an electronics division with its sole objective to make timekeeping as accurate as possible. And quartz technology is the most accurate. There is no other more accurate form. And every one of the clocks in this exhibition have quartz at their base. And then from there, they take it to the next level.
And they are Patek Philippe's.
And every single clock is a Patek Philippe clock. And, people assume that it was the Japanese companies like Seiko that developed quartz technology. But what we can do with this exhibition is actually prove that Patek Philippe was making that technology before anyone else.
Fascinating.
So let's have a look. Obviously, we're going to have to go straight to this Rolex because everybody's interested in that. And a lot of people didn't realize that, particularly during the 60s and early 70s, Patek Philippe made master timing systems for most of the main Swiss watch brands, including Rolex. So what does that mean? It means that all of these manufacturers would have judged the timing of their production using this a Patek Philippe system. And what's wonderful about this particular clock, you can see it's actually still got its Patek Philippe branded dial, even though it's in this very smart green Rolex case.
The double signed Patek
So
and
here
Rolex.
we have something extraordinarily rare, which is a double signed, to your point, Rolex and Patek. So you're only going to see something like that here.
Nice.
So this clock would have been in the main Rolex factory, and it would have operated subsidiary clocks that would have been on the workbenches of watchmakers. And this was made in 1968, and I just want to draw your attention to this RHAP, the RAP system, which actually came out in 1967. And what that is Patek Philippe's, again, it's Patek Philippe technology, and it connects with the observatory in Geneva. So to ensure even more accurate time, the system is set to observatory time. And it is the RAP radio signal that connects this with the observatory. Now, prior to that, it wasn't possible to do that. The only way you could check on observatory time was to listen to the radio. And it would either be at 12 noon, you'd hear beep, 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 and then you'd know it was 12 noon and you could set your watch, and then you had the exact time. What this system does is it continually monitors the observatory time signals, which are based on atomic timekeeping and therefore the most accurate.
So is it one of the first atomic clocks? Maybe
No,
very first?
Patek made earlier atomic clocks. What's interesting about this is this is a commercial clock that ran many subsidiary clocks.
Got it.
So
Very
what we
cool.
call a master clock. So this is a master clock system with that technology in it. Benches of watchmakers at Rolex, and so as you can see, it's got Rolex on the dial here. But if you were to open it up, you'd see it was a Patek movement inside. So those are really fun things.
Do these synchronize, or watchmakers would synchronize them with
they would
because that one is master
clock is
master
synchronized to that. So yes, these are synchronized to the master clock.
Master clock.
But obviously, for a watchmaker adjusting a movement, they would look at this for the most accurate time. Had these clocks on their warships. So you can see it's this galvanized metal because for two reasons. Obviously, the most obvious is waterproof, hence why we've got this sealed frame, but also because temperature changes are the most critical thing for quartz timekeeping. It has to be a continuous temperature so that the crystal itself keeps oscillating at the same rate. So any change in temperature will affect that. Therefore, casing like this will keep a constant temperature inside, which is very important for a ship that is going all over the world, and therefore the temperature is changing. Yeah. So that's why they're encased in this kind of a box. Made in 1963, and it is one of the first ever quartz clocks that was ever made by Patek. So this is also another master clock. It would have driven subsidiary clocks. We think it probably came from a power plant, something like that. But that's one of the first ever made. What's fun about this machine is we're calling it the police case, and it has in it ZG4 technology, which is Patek Philippe's technology for surveillance. And basically what this is it's a phone. It's a very big portable phone that was made in the early 80s for Halliburton, and it would have been the property of a head of state, a head of a military operation, an important CEO, anyone who needed to make phone calls that they didn't want anyone else to listen into. So this, it decodes every conversation, and then if you know how to program it, you can rewind it and hear the actual conversation. Interestingly, in here, there is a tape. We took it out and played it, but it's just a loud screeching sound. And unfortunately, we don't know how to program this to decode it and listen to it.
Oh, because it's encoded.
It's encoded. I see. So this machine will decode as well, but we don't know how to program it. If we did, we'd hear what they were saying, which could either be extremely interesting or it could be an order for pizza, but we don't know. This is a real Patek Philippe phone.
Cool.
Obviously, this is one of the biggest clocks we have. It's the biggest clock we have here today, and we're calling it the RUNDFUNK clock, and it was made for a broadcasting system in Germany. It's sort of the equivalent of NBC. And it's got 3 master clocks on it. 1, 2, 3. And some of them we'll see later have 3 analog dials on it. This one doesn't, but you can see it's ticking.
This
is the seconds. So instead of seeing a hand going around, you're seeing this showing that it's accurately going. And the purpose of 3 master clocks is, again, for accuracy and also something called redundancy. So if 2 of them are saying the exact same time, it means it's working.
Got it.
You've got this, you can test, you're testing that it's working. If one goes off, then as long as 2 are still working, you know you've got the right time. But if 2 go off, you've got to question whether or not that's the right time.
Got it.
And so this system is called a rack system. You could, if you needed
to
that's
like
fix
in computers,
this, you pull it out and it will not affect any other rack. So if you need to mend this clock, for example, we can see something's not right with this clock because all these red lights are on. So we've got to take this out and see what's wrong. But it won't affect the running of the rest of it. And that's really important because if we look on this side here, we'll see there are 55 dials.
Oh my God.
Now, each of those dials is running a subsidiary clock. So this could be somewhere in the radio station, the TV station, a room. It could be in a room, or it could be anywhere. But interestingly, each of these can run up to 100 subsidiary clocks. So in other words, this could either run 55 clocks or 5,500 clocks.
Whoa.
So huge institutions would use these if they need to know the time in very large areas with lots and lots of rooms. So Parliament is a good example. Obviously a broadcasting system would have many, many rooms. And if you'd like to have a look at the electronics behind, you can peek on the other side of there.
Whoa, okay, you need to film that.
Every single electronic plate was hand drawn by an engineer and then hand soldered. So what's interesting, we found one person who's able to fix these for us because he's an engineer. He trained from his grandfather who used to work at NASA, and he said these are the highest quality electronic circuit boards he's ever seen, bar some made for the space shuttle. I mentioned earlier that these clocks were made for institutions. They're commercially used. They weren't made for private individuals, primarily because they're too expensive. I mean, they're meant to run big corporations, big companies, big institutions. This is slightly different. This was actually made for Gobelin, which is a retailer, a Patek Philippe retailer in Switzerland and Germany, and they loved the technology so much that in 1966 they commissioned Patek Philippe to make a master clock that they had in their workshops. But this that we're looking at here was actually put out on the street at their branch in Lugano, so that passers-by could get the most accurate time possible by looking at this digital printout of the time. So that was really rather fun. But they had a master clock in their workshops because they did a lot of repairs and things like that. So that's why they had one. They just embraced the technology so much. And then this clock here, this is actually made for a German power plant in 1977. Again, it has 3 master clocks. This one here is the 3rd clock. You can see it's not actually ticking, and we know something's gone wrong here because these red lights are on. So we will have to get this one repaired. But as I mentioned earlier, we're very lucky we have somebody who can help us do that. And what's interesting about this clock, it has Nixie tubes that are telling the time here. And if you look closely, you can see how each tube, fluorescent tube, has indices that change to tell the time. It's fun, isn't it? So this can be accurate up to 1,000th of a second, which is really extraordinary. That's the highest standard of timekeeping. This was made for a military hospital, where obviously timekeeping accuracy is extremely important, a matter of life and death, and it's another 3 master clock system. Here it's showing, very interestingly, international clocks. So we've got Buenos Aires, Sydney, Tokyo and Bombay. I guess because it was a military hospital, they had more interest in international times, but that's unusual to see. The Mona Lisa of the collection, because for us it's really the most important clock in this collection. It was made in 1971 for the Swiss Parliament, and that was obviously a very early time. It was one of the first big master clock systems that was made, and really important for Patek, because the fact that the entire country was being run off their timekeeping system was a great PR job for them, basically. This is even though it's slightly smaller than the broadcast clock, the RUNDFUNK clock that we looked at, it's actually much bigger than that. This has 65 subsidiary dials, and as I mentioned before, each of these can run an additional 100 clocks. So this could run as many as 6,500 clocks. It was the parliamentary building, which is in Bern in Switzerland. It's a huge building with many, many hundreds of rooms, and each of those rooms would have been wired into this system to tell the time. So they'd have a clock on the wall that said the time based on this master clock system.
So all these, like, if I would connect like hundreds of clocks to this, then they would have to be wired to this.
That's a very good question. They'd have to be wired, and I'm going to show you.
Oh, you even have. Whoa!
So we're used to seeing clocks like this,
yes,
either in a train station or on the wall of a big room. So this is a good example of a subsidiary clock that would be wired into here, and
nice.
would that's how it worked. Zurich Airport, and we have a couple of other airport clocks actually, because that was very obviously it's particularly important at airports that you're telling the right time, because you want to know that your flight is on time. But I don't know if you know, so we call this exhibition the Meeting Point exhibition, and the reason that that name has come about is because in Zurich they had another master clock that was actually in the center concourse of the airport terminal that had a great big square sign on top that said Meeting Point in various languages. And it's where people would go to check the time of their own watches by looking there to make sure they had the most accurate time. And also it's a meeting point. You could say, oh, meet me at the clock at Zurich Airport. And so that's where we got the name Meeting Point from. And this is the inspiration. This actual clock, this master clock here is the actual inspiration for it. Here's another airport clock. This is from Frankfurt. And if you have a look at the side here, you'll see a symbol, which is of Lufthansa, because this clock is from the early 1980s, and in Germany, Lufthansa would have run the airport. We know it as an airline, but it was also running the airport. And as you can see, now we've moved from Nixie tubes, or in the 80s, so we've moved to LED.
Yep. Nice.
This has got a recording facility on it, if you look here. So this would either have been to record a radio jingle or a radio message, or to say the time now is burp. So it's unusual for us to actually see this, but Patek made these recording systems as well. Is from a nuclear power station. And it was made in 1982. And what's interesting about this system, as is the same, funnily enough, with the Frankfurt airport, is that you can lock this. So why would you want to lock it? Well, for security. You don't want anyone fiddling with it. So because the time, especially in a nuclear power plant, is a matter of life and death. Because all the machinery is going to work off these systems, and you can't have any issues at all. This also has LED timing in it. So these are from the 70s. We don't unfortunately know what these would have powered, because we haven't got any background information on these, unfortunately. Because we want to know, what are they doing? What are they showing us here? Obviously, different times. So again, this could have been something for a broadcasting company where you want to know different time zones or something like that. This is a telequartz.
Oh wow, what is this?
So this has the same technology in it as one of these. And so remember we said that the technology started to become redundant because things got smaller and smaller and smaller. GPS became the normal way of connecting and finding accurate time. And this is this is the last generation, if you like, of electronic master clocks.
Oh, nice.
And so it's 60 times smaller than anything before it, but it could run many hundreds of subsidiary clocks as well. So the same technology is in here, and we all understand that technology has got smaller and smaller. Look at our iPhones, quartz watches. So that's where the technology ended. But before we go to the very end, let's have a look at this, because this is fun. This is a clock that was made for NASA. And this is a portable clock. It's very, very heavy. It would have been even more heavy because this is a battery. It's not in at the moment for obviously for safety reasons, the battery, but it's heavy, and it would have been very heavy with the battery. And this would have been taken to rocket sites to double check timing. And certainly most of the early
for redundancy.
Exactly. For redundancy, exactly that. And most of the early rocket ships, they were launched by Patek Philippe timing systems. Whoa. The countdown was a Patek Philippe timing system.
Nice.
So this is just fun because this is one of the that we've seen, one of the earliest LED systems. And the technology for using LED was Patek partnered with Solari & Co. And Solari & Co. is an Italian watch company that's still very much in existence today. And they make the big, when you go to an airport and you see the click, 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 click signs or a train station, they're normally Solari clocks that are telling you the time electronically.
And they come
so
up
they
with
pioneered using LED as a to show time.
Replacement. Nice. Who owns? Is it like a collection from like multiple Is it owned by Collectability? Like
so this is owned by Collectability and AnalogShift. We own this collection together. It's for sale as a complete collection. We really want to keep it together as a collection. We think that's important.
Okay, so if one of my viewers want to buy it, then
they're very welcome.
They will contact you.
They're very welcome to buy it. Yes, and we would love it if someone kept it together, because it's extraordinary to have a collection of this scale of electronic clocks. Hence why we really want to try and keep them together.
I see.
But there's an interesting history behind how they were collected. Most of them were collected by a gentleman called Michael Schuldes, who lives in Germany. He's German, and he started collecting in 1973 these clocks, and he found his first clock as a teenager in a flea market in Germany.
Patek Philippe clock?
A Patek Philippe electronic clock. And he thought, I know, I'm going to take this to Patek in Geneva, and I'm going to see if they want to exchange it for a watch, because he'd always wanted a Patek Philippe watch. And they said, well, we won't do that, but we'll help you fix it. And they introduced him to their electronics division. And that started a passion that he held for many, many, many decades, actually, until 2014, where he had to sell the clocks because he needed to put his children through college. And so he sold the bulk of these master clocks at that time to a jewelry retailing store in New Orleans called R.S. Rao. And we purchased them, the bulk of the collection from R.S. Rao. The others are made up of clocks that we at Collectability have individually collected. John Reardon is a huge fan of electronic clocks. He has been for a long time.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And so that's why he was chasing this collection. And we spent much time speaking with Michael Schultes about this collection, about how he collected them. And I don't know if you recall, I showed you the Mona Lisa clock, as we call it, which is the master clock system that was made for the Swiss Parliament. It took him 12 years to acquire that clock, because it was serviced by a German engineering company called Kreutler. And when in the early 90s, this is an important thing, that the technology in these clocks became obsolete, and so they stopped using them. And so Kreutler just kept the clock downstairs in its basement next to the coffee machine. And as I mentioned, for 12 years, Michael Schultes would visit this clock and talk to the CEO over a cup of coffee.
But they wouldn't sell it.
But they wouldn't sell it. And then eventually the CEO retired. And his retirement was to let Michael Schultes buy that machine. And as we mentioned, it's in our opinion, the most important of all our collection because it's very early, it's 1971, but has the most extraordinary technology in it and is the largest clock that we know of in existence.
Thank you so much for showing us these wonderful Patek Philippe's. This is just absolutely amazing. And yeah, if you guys are interested in this collection, please contact Collectability. Thank you.
Thank you. It's an absolute pleasure. I'm really glad that you came, and I hope your viewers find it as interesting as we do. It's a fascinating look at the history of horology.
Thank you so much.